It was the middle of winter. The wind howled through the trees, carrying thick snowflakes that covered everything in white. The forest was silent, except for the sound of icy branches creaking under the weight of snow. Inside a small wooden cabin, a young mother, Mira Carter, rocked her baby Noah gently in her arms. The warm glow of the fireplace filled the cozy room, casting soft shadows on the wooden walls. Mira hummed a lullaby, her voice blending with the crackling of the fire. Noah, just 3 months old, blinked sleepily, his tiny fingers curling around his mother's sweater. Across the room, Jason Carter, Mira's husband, added another log to the fire. He glanced out the window, his eyes scanning the dark forest beyond. Their cabin stood alone, deep in the wilderness, far from any neighbors. That was how they liked it. Peaceful, quiet, away from the noise of the world. But that night, something felt different. Jason rubbed his hands together and sighed. "The storm is getting worse," he said, his voice low. Snow swirled outside, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "I should check the generator before it gets too dark." Mira nodded. She carefully placed Noah in his wooden crib, tucking a thick blanket around him. Then she turned to Jason. "Be quick," she said softly. "I don't like how tonight feels. Something is off." Jason grabbed his coat and zipped it up. He reached for his gloves, but before he could put them on, everything went silent. The wind, which had been roaring moments ago, suddenly stopped. The trees no longer creaked. Even the distant calls of birds and owls vanished. The cabin felt too quiet. Mira shivered. She had lived in the forest for years, and she knew one thing for certain. When the forest goes silent, it means danger is near. Jason froze by the door, his hand resting on the handle. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Mira listened. At first there was nothing, just the faint crackling of the fire. But then, thud, a heavy sound against the cabin wall. Noah stirred in his crib, making a tiny noise but not waking up. Jason turned toward the sound, his face pale. Thud. Again, something large hit the cabin. This time, it was followed by a low, deep rumbling noise. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the creak of trees. It sounded like an animal. Mira rushed to the window, her heart pounding. She wiped the foggy glass with her sleeve and peered outside. Snowflakes danced in the air, making it hard to see. But then, through the swirling white, she saw it, a massive shape, a bear. It was standing on its hind legs, pressing a paw against the cabin wall. But something was strange about it. It wasn't growling. It wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She followed the bear's gaze and gasped. Behind it, 2 tiny cubs stood huddled together in the snow. Their fur was covered in frost and they were shivering from the cold. "Jason." Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a mother bear and she has cubs." Jason hurried to the window. His eyes widened when he saw them. "That's not all," he said, pointing toward the trees. Mira looked to the left. Her stomach dropped. A second mother bear stepped out from the forest. She too had a cub following close behind. But this cub was different. It was limping, struggling to walk through the thick snow. Mira and Jason stood frozen, staring at the unbelievable sight. 2 mother bears, 3 cubs, sitting in the storm looking directly at their cabin. "What do they want?" Mira whispered. Jason didn't answer. He didn't know. Before they could figure it out, Noah suddenly let out a loud cry from his crib. His tiny voice filled the cabin, breaking the heavy silence. And then, something even stranger happened. The larger mother bear lifted her head. Her ears perked up. Then she let out a low, soft moan. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a warning. There was a sound that mirrored Noah's cry. Mira's eyes widened. "Jason, she's responding to Noah." Jason swallowed hard. That's not possible. But it was. Mira had spent her life studying animals. She had seen mother bears call to their cubs before. This was the same sound. A call of comfort. A mother's voice. Something inside Mira told her that these bears weren't here by accident. They hadn't just wandered in search of food. They had come for help. And for some reason, they had chosen them. Jason gripped the edge of the window, his knuckles turning white. "Mira, they're wild animals. You understand that, right?" Mira barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on the bears. They weren't leaving. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. Jason turned to Mira, his face serious. "What are you thinking?" Mira slowly backed away from the window and picked up Noah. His cries softened as she held him close. She looked at Jason, her voice steady. "I think," she said, "they need us." Jason exhaled sharply. He turned back to the window, watching the bears sit patiently in the snow, their cubs shivering against them. His instincts screamed danger, but something deeper, something human, told him that this was more than just an animal encounter. This was a plea for help, and in that moment, standing in their small cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, Jason and Mira Carter knew. Their lives were about to change forever. Jason and Mira stood frozen, staring through the window at the two mother bears and their cubs. The storm raged on, snow falling thick and fast, but the bears didn't move. They sat patiently, huddled together, their dark eyes fixed on the cabin. Mira clutched Noah tightly. His small whimpers faded as he pressed against her warmth. Jason swallowed hard, still gripping the window frame. "This is insane," he muttered. "Bears don't act like this." But they were. Mira knew wild animals were unpredictable. Bears usually avoided humans unless they were desperate. And these bears, two mothers, had walked straight to their home in the middle of a storm. And now they were waiting. Jason moved away from the window and grabbed his rifle from the wall. "What are you doing?" Mira asked, her voice sharp. "I don't know what they want, but I'm not taking chances," he said, checking the bullets. Mira stepped in front of him. "No, you are not shooting them." Jason clenched his jaw. "Mira, they're wild animals. They could turn aggressive any second." Mira looked back at the bears. They weren't growling, they weren't charging. They weren't even trying to break into the cabin. Instead, the larger mother bear let out a low moan, the same sound she had made when Noah cried. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto her belly in the snow. She wasn't challenging them. She was submitting. Mira's heart pounded. "Jason, look at them. They're not attacking, they're asking." Jason hesitated, glancing back at the window. The larger mother bear nudged one of her cubs forward with her nose. The small bear wobbled slightly, then pressed itself against the door. A cold shiver ran through Mira. "She's offering her cub," she whispered. Jason's face paled. "Why would a bear do that?" Mira didn't have an answer. Before they could react, the second mother bear, the one with the injured cub, stepped closer. The limping cub tried to move, but it stumbled in the snow, letting out a tiny whimper. Mira's breath caught in her throat. "That one's hurt," Jason frowned. "Maybe that's why they're here. Maybe they smelled the cabin and thought..." Bang! A gunshot echoed through the forest. The bears flinched, their heads snapping toward the sound. The cubs cowered, pressing against their mothers. Jason cursed under his breath. "Hunters!" Mira's stomach twisted. "Out here? In this weather?" Jason's expression darkened. "Illegal hunters. The season ended weeks ago." A second gunshot rang out, closer this time. The mother bears didn't run. Instead, they turned back toward the cabin, their bodies tense but still waiting. Mira's heart pounded. "Jason, we can't leave them out there. That little cub is already hurt. They won't survive if those hunters find them." Jason exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle. "You want to bring bears into our house?" Mira shook her head. "Not the house, the storage shed. It's insulated, big enough for them to shelter from the storm, just for the night." Jason looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You want me to invite 4 bears into our backyard?" Mira met his gaze. "Yes." Jason rubbed a hand down his face. "This is insane." Another gunshot echoed through the trees, even closer now. Mira turned to the window. The larger mother bear was still watching her. Mira looked into those dark eyes. She wasn't imagining it. This bear wasn't just waiting, she was pleading. Mira swallowed hard and whispered, "She's a mother, Jason. Just like me." Jason stared at the bears, then at Mira. Then he sighed, dropping his head. "The storage. She has a separate entrance from the back," he muttered. "I can lead them around without getting too close." Relief flooded through Mira. "Thank you." "But," Jason added firmly, "you and Noah stay inside, lock the doors. If anything goes wrong, you call for help and get out of here." Mira nodded. She had a deep feeling that nothing would go wrong, because these weren't just bears, they were mothers, and mothers protect each other. Jason bundled up in his thickest coat, pulling on gloves and a hat. He grabbed a flashlight and his rifle, not to hurt the bears, but just in case he had to scare off the hunters. Mira stood by the window, watching as he stepped outside into the freezing snow. The wind had picked up again, biting at his exposed skin. Jason took slow, steady steps toward the front of the cabin. The bears immediately noticed him. The larger mother bear rose to her feet, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. Jason's instincts screamed at him to turn back. Every survival book he had ever read said, "Never approach a bear." But these bears weren't acting normal, they were waiting for his lead. Jason took a deep breath and pointed toward the shed. "This way," he said, knowing they wouldn't understand his words, but hoping they could understand his intention. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the larger bear tilted her head. She turned toward her cubs and let out a soft, chuffing noise. To Jason's shock, the cubs obeyed immediately, stumbling through the snow toward him. Then the mother followed. Jason took a slow step back. So did the bears. Step by step, Jason led them away from the cabin. He kept his movements slow, his voice low, murmuring calming words even though he knew they didn't understand. Mira held her breath inside the cabin, her hands clenched into fists. They were trusting him. They were following him. The smaller mother bear hesitated at first, looking back toward the forest. Her injured cub whimpered. Then, as if making a decision, she gently nudged the cub forward and began following the others. Mira's eyes filled with tears. They were doing it. Jason reached the shed, fumbling with the keys. His fingers were stiff from the cold. He finally got the door open and stepped aside. The larger mother bear stopped just outside. She sniffed the air, testing the space. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped inside. Her cubs followed. The second mother bear hesitated, her limping cub pressing against her leg. Then, finally, she stepped in, guiding her cub gently. Jason exhaled, his breath visible in the freezing air. He slowly pulled the door almost shut, leaving a small gap so they wouldn't feel trapped. Then he turned and walked back toward the cabin. Mira met him at the door, her eyes wide. "They went in?" Jason nodded, still looking shaken. "Like, they knew exactly what I was offering." Mira placed a hand on his arm, gripping it tight. "We did the right thing." Jason let out a heavy breath, finally allowing himself to believe it. Inside the shed, the bears settled in. The cubs curled up against their mothers, and for the first time that night they were safe. But this story wasn't over yet, because outside, deep in the forest, the hunters were still coming. Jason stood by the door, his breath still heavy from the cold. The bears were in the shed. Safe, at least for now. Mira pressed a hand against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. "I still can't believe they actually followed you," she whispered. Jason exhaled. "Me neither." It was like they understood. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees. The snow kept falling, covering everything in a thick white blanket. The world was silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. Mira turned to look at Noah, who was still asleep in his crib. His tiny fingers twitched in his sleep, his face peaceful. He had no idea how close they had just been to danger, or how close they still were. Jason walked to the window and peered outside. The shed stood a few yards away, its roof covered in snow. The door was slightly open, just enough to let the bears breathe, but not enough to let the cold in. But Jason wasn't looking at the shed. He was looking at the dark forest beyond it. "They're still out there," he muttered. Mira's stomach twisted. "The hunters," Jason nodded. "I know their type, they won't just leave." Mira swallowed hard. She knew he was right. A third gunshot cracked through the night, closer this time. Mira flinched. She turned to Jason, panic in her eyes. "What? If they come here?" Jason clenched his jaw. "Then I'll handle it." He picked up his rifle and checked the bullets. Mira grabbed his arm. "No, we need to call for help." Jason hesitated. "The rangers are miles away, Mira. Even if we call now, they won't get here in time. But we have to try." Mira hurried to the kitchen, grabbing her phone from the counter. She tapped the screen. No signal. Her heart sank. No service. Jason cursed under his breath. The storm must have knocked the towers out. Mira gritted her teeth. They were on their own. Another gunshot rang out. This time, it was followed by voices. Jason stiffened. "They're getting closer." Mira's mind raced. The bears were in the shed. If the hunters found them, they wouldn't hesitate to shoot. And if Jason confronted them alone, she didn't even want to think about it. She had to do something. Mira took a deep breath, trying to think. What if we distract them? Jason frowned. How? She turned to the fireplace, watching the flames flicker. Smoke! Jason's eyes widened. You want to make them think there's a fire? Mira nodded quickly. If they think something's wrong here, they might come investigate instead of going to the shed. Jason hesitated. That's risky. If they come here, we're trapped. Mira looked at Noah, then back at Jason. I'd rather have them here where we can control the situation than out there with the bears. Jason ran a hand through his hair. He hated this, but he knew she was right. All right, he said, let's do it. Jason grabbed extra logs and threw them into the fireplace. The flames roared, sending thick smoke curling toward the ceiling. Mira ran to the back door and opened it slightly, letting some of the smoke escape. The cold air rushed in, making her shiver. Jason peered out the window. The voices were closer now. They're coming, he whispered. Mira's pulse pounded in her ears. She grabbed Noah from his crib, holding him close. If anything happens, we run. Jason nodded, gripping his rifle. Then they waited. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Then, a knock at the door. Mira's breath caught. Jason took a slow step forward. Who's there? A rough voice answered. We're looking for something. Jason tightened his grip on the gun. Looking for what? Another voice chuckled. Don't play dumb, friend. We saw the tracks. You got bears on your property? Mira's stomach dropped. Jason glanced at her, then turned back to the door. Just me, my wife, and my baby, he said smoothly. We don't take kindly to trespassers. Silence. Then, well, that's funny, 'cause we followed bear. Tracks right to your place. Jason's hands clenched into fists. Mira's heart pounded. If they pushed past the door, if they went to the shed, it would be over. She looked at Jason. He looked at her. One wrong move could turn deadly. Before Jason could respond, a new sound filled the air. A low, deep growl, not from Jason, not from the hunters, from the shed. Mira's eyes widened. The bears had heard the voices. They were awake. The hunters must have heard them too, because one of them stepped back. What the hell was that? Jason seized the moment. He lifted his rifle, not pointing it at them, but holding it in a way that made his message clear. You should leave, he said firmly. The men hesitated. Then, another growl, this one louder. Mira could almost picture the larger mother bear inside the shed, standing between her cubs and the door, warning them to stay away. The leader of the hunters cursed under his breath. Let's go, he muttered. The others hesitated, but when another deep growl rumbled through the night, they turned and walked away. Jason waited until the sound of their footsteps disappeared. Then, he finally exhaled. They're gone, he whispered. Mira felt her knees go weak with relief. Jason turned to her. That was too close. Mira nodded, holding Noah tightly, but it worked. Jason looked out the window one last time. The storm was starting to ease. The snow fell more gently now, the trees still heavy with white. They had made it through the night, but this wasn't over. Not yet. Jason walked to the back door and looked toward the shed. The bears were still inside. Mira joined him, her heart full of emotion. They knew, she whispered. They heard the hunters, and they reacted. Jason nodded slowly. They protected themselves. Mira glanced down at Noah, still sleeping peacefully. Then she looked back at the shed. Mothers protecting their young. No matter the species, some things were universal. Jason took her hand. Tomorrow we figure out what to do next. Mira nodded. Tomorrow. For now, they had survived, and so had the bears. But outside, beyond the trees, the hunters weren't finished. They would be back, and next time they wouldn't walk away so easily. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin everything was still. Mira held Noah close, listening to his steady breathing. Jason stood by the window, watching the shed. The hunters were gone. For now. Mira exhaled, rubbing her arms for warmth. Do you think they'll come back? Jason didn't take his eyes off the snow-covered landscape. Maybe, but not tonight. They don't know for sure the bears are here. Mira bit her lip. But they suspect. Jason finally turned to her, his expression serious. Yeah, and if they find them, they won't hesitate. Mira shuddered. The image of the injured cub flashed in her mind. She knew they had done the right thing, bringing them to the shed. But now the weight of that decision settled heavily on her chest. They had chosen to help. Now they had to protect them. Jason pulled on his coat again. Mira frowned. Where are you going? To check on them. Mira hesitated. It was dangerous, but the thought of the bears huddled in the cold shed, uncertain and afraid, made her heart ache. "I'm coming with you." Jason shook his head. "No way, stay here with Noah." "I'm not going inside," she argued. "I just want to bring them water. They might be thirsty." Jason sighed, but didn't argue. "Fine. Stay behind me." Mira wrapped Noah tightly in a blanket and placed him in his crib. Then she grabbed a small container of water and an old towel. Together they stepped into the cold night. The wind had calmed slightly, but the snow was thick beneath their boots. Their breaths came out in visible puffs of white. They walked slowly toward the shed. Every step felt like a risk. Jason reached the door first. He hesitated, then carefully pushed it open. Inside, it was dark, but Mira could see movement. 4 dark shapes curled up in the farthest corner. The 2 mother bears sat alert, their eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Their cubs were nestled between them, the injured one resting its head against its mother's side. Mira's heart clenched. They looked exhausted. Jason stepped inside cautiously. The larger mother bear lifted her head, watching him closely. Mira held her breath. Would they react? Would they see them as a threat? Slowly, Jason placed his rifle down, out of reach, but visible, a sign that he meant no harm. Mira took a small step forward and set the container of water on the ground. She pushed it toward them gently with her foot, careful not to make any sudden movements. The bears didn't move. Then the injured cub whimpered. The smaller mother bear glanced at Mira. Then, to Mira's complete shock, she nudged the cub forward. Mira gasped softly. Jason stiffened. She's letting you see it." Mira took a slow breath. Her instincts told her this was a test. The bear was trusting her. She crouched down, keeping her movements slow and steady. The little cub lifted its swollen paw, its body trembling. Mira's eyes filled with tears. The injury was bad. The poor thing must have been in so much pain. "I need to help it," she whispered. Jason looked alarmed. "Mira, that's a wild bear." "She knows," Mira whispered back. "She's asking me to help." The mother bear didn't growl. She didn't pull her cub back. She was allowing it. Mira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small first aid kit. She moved slowly. Every motion was careful, deliberate. She unwrapped the towel and gently placed it near the cub's paw, the bee. Little one flinched but didn't pull away. Mira's heart pounded as she carefully examined the injury. There was dried blood and something small and sharp sticking out. "A trap," she murmured. "There's metal stuck in the wound." Jason cursed under his breath. "Those hunters." Mira took a deep breath. "I have to remove it." Jason looked at the mother bear. She was watching everything. Mira met her gaze. "I'll be careful." The mother bear didn't move. Mira's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the small metal piece with her tweezers. "Hold still, little one," she whispered. She gave a small, firm tug. The metal came free. The cub let out a sharp cry, jerking slightly. Immediately, Mira pulled back, expecting the mother to react. Jason tensed, his hand inching toward his rifle. But the mother bear didn't growl. She didn't move. Instead, she leaned down and licked her cub's face, soothing it. Mira exhaled shakily. "She knows." She quickly applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped the paw in a small bandage. The cub whimpered again but didn't pull away. When she was finished, she backed up slowly, giving them space. The mother bear gently pulled her cub close, nuzzling it. Then she did something that stunned them both. She looked directly at Mira and dipped her head. It wasn't much, just a small motion, but Mira knew. "She just thanked you," Jason whispered in disbelief. Mira's throat tightened. "I think so." Jason glanced at the larger mother bear. She hadn't moved this whole time, but now she stepped forward slightly. Mira held her breath. The bear reached out, not toward them, but toward the water container. She sniffed it. Then, slowly, she took a sip. Jason's jaw dropped. "They trust us." Mira felt something deep in her chest, a connection, a silent understanding. "We helped them," she whispered, "and they know it." The bears settled down again, their bodies curling protectively around the cubs. Mira and Jason slowly stepped back toward the door. Before leaving, Mira looked at them one last time. The injured cub had already started to drift to sleep, nestled against its mother. The larger mother bear watched Mira for a few more seconds, Then finally she lowered her head and closed her eyes. Mira swallowed hard. She had spent years reading about animal behavior, watching documentaries, studying wildlife, but nothing could compare to this. This wasn't just survival. This was trust. Jason gently pulled Mira toward the door. "Let's go." They stepped outside, shutting the door carefully behind them. The storm had calmed. The night was still. Mira turned to Jason. "We can't just leave them after this." Jason sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know." They walked back toward the cabin, their footprints the only marks in the fresh snow. Jason exhaled. "We'll figure something out tomorrow." Mira nodded. "Tomorrow." She glanced back at the shed, her heart full of emotion. Tonight, they had built something incredible. Not fear, not survival, trust. And somehow deep inside she knew this was just the beginning. The night had finally settled. The storm had calmed. The wind no longer howled and the snow fell in soft, lazy flakes. Inside the cabin, Mira and Jason sat in silence, the fire crackling beside them. Noah was asleep in his crib, his tiny hands curled into fists, and outside in the storage shed the bears were resting too. Mira still couldn't believe it. She had just treated an injured wild bear cub, and the mother had let her. It felt unreal, but it had happened. Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is crazy." Mira smiled softly. "Yeah." Jason shook his head. "No, I mean really crazy. We have 4 bears in our shed, and we just helped them." Mira's smile faded. "And we have hunters out there who want to kill them." Jason's face hardened. Yeah, they both knew the truth. Tonight the bears were safe, but tomorrow, that was a different story. Jason got up and walked to the window. The forest was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow. The tracks leading to the shed were already disappearing under the snowfall, but Jason wasn't looking at the shed. He was looking at the trees. The hunters were out there, somewhere. Mira stood beside him, wrapping her arms around herself. You think they're still looking?" Jason's jaw clenched. "They won't give up that easily." Mira swallowed hard. "What if they come back?" Jason exhaled. "Then we'll deal with it." Mira knew that meant he was ready to fight if he had to. She looked down at Noah sleeping peacefully. He had no idea how much danger surrounded them. She placed a hand on Jason's arm. "We need a plan." Jason nodded. "First thing in the morning, we call the rangers." Mira bit her lip. "What if the hunters find the bears before they get here?" Jason didn't answer, because they both knew if the hunters came back before sunrise, the bears wouldn't stand a chance. Just as Mira was about to say something else, crunch, a sound outside. Jason froze. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Another crunch, footsteps. Jason grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door. He pressed his back against the wall, listening. Mira rushed to Noah's crib, scooping him up and holding him close. Her heart pounded in her chest. Someone was outside. Jason slowly peeked through the window. His eyes narrowed. Then he whispered, "They're back." Mira's stomach dropped. Jason motioned for Mira to stay quiet. Then, gripping his rifle tightly, he moved toward the door. Mira held Noah close, barely breathing. A knock, not loud. Not aggressive, but firm. Jason hesitated, then called out, "Who's there?" A voice answered. A deep, rough voice. "Looking for something." Jason tightened his grip. "You need to leave." Silence. Then another voice. "We saw tracks leading here." Jason's jaw clenched. Mira felt her hands shaking. "We don't know what you're talking about," Jason said, his voice firm. The first voice chuckled. "Don't lie, friend. We know there's something in that shed." Mira's blood ran. Cold Jason lifted his rifle just slightly. "You're trespassing." Silence. Then the sound of snow crunching as the men stepped closer. Mira's heart pounded. If they reached the shed, the bears would be trapped. Then suddenly, a deep rumbling growl. Not from Jason, not from the hunters, from the shed. Mira's eyes widened. The bears had heard them. One of the hunters cursed. What the hell was that? Another growl, louder this time. Then a heavy thud. Something big had moved inside the shed. The hunters hesitated. Jason took a deep breath and stepped forward, opening the door just slightly. "You should leave," he said again. The hunters didn't respond right away. Then the leader spoke. His voice was lower this time. "You don't want to get in the middle of this." Jason's expression darkened. "You don't want to push me." Another long silence. Then, finally, the sound of footsteps retreating. Mira let out a shaky breath. She heard one of the men mutter, "This ain't over." Then they were gone. Jason locked the door and turned back to Mira. "They're leaving." Mira sagged against the wall, her arms still wrapped around Noah. For now. Jason walked to the window, watching as the hunters disappeared into the forest. Then he turned to the shed. The bears were silent again. Mira swallowed hard. "They knew, Jason." Jason nodded. "They did. They had heard the voices. They had sensed the danger, and they had protected themselves." Mira took a shaky breath. "What do we do now?" Jason looked back at her. "We stick to the plan. We call the rangers at sunrise, and until then..." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We don't let our guard down." Mira sat by the fire, rocking Noah gently. Jason stayed by the window, his rifle within reach. Outside, the storm had almost stopped. The snow had settled. The world was still, but the danger hadn't passed. Mira looked toward the shed, imagining the bears inside, the injured cub, the exhausted mothers. They had trusted them. Now, it was their turn to keep them safe. Jason sighed. "It's going to be a long night." Mira nodded. "Yeah," but deep in her heart she knew. They weren't alone anymore. The bears had come to them for help, and now they were in this together. Mira didn't sleep that night. She sat by the fire, rocking Noah gently, listening to the quiet hum of the wind outside. Jason stayed by the window, his rifle close. His eyes never left the tree line. The hunters were gone, for now. But they would come back. Mira glanced at the shed. The bears were still inside, resting. They had trusted them. Now it was their turn to protect them. Morning couldn't come fast enough. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Jason was already pulling on his boots. Mira wrapped Noah in a blanket, holding him close. "Are you sure they'll come?" Jason grabbed his phone, checking the signal. "We have service again. I'm calling the rangers now." He dialed quickly, pacing as he waited. After a few rings, a voice answered. "Ranger station." Jason took a deep breath. "We've got a problem. Illegal hunters, and we have bears." Pause. Then, "Did you say bears?" Jason's grip tightened on the phone. "2 mother bears, 3 cubs, 1 is injured. We gave them shelter during the storm. But now hunters are tracking them." The ranger cursed under his breath. "That's serious. Where are you located?" Jason gave him their cabin's coordinates. The ranger's voice was firm. "Stay put. We're sending a team, but it'll take at least an hour." Jason clenched his jaw. "We might not have that long." Mira packed supplies, water, blankets, a first aid kit. Jason loaded his rifle just in case. They both knew they had to move the bears before the hunters returned. Mira turned to Jason. "We have to lead them somewhere safe." Jason frowned. "Like where?" Mira thought for a moment. Then her eyes lit up. "The old wildlife reserve," she said. "It's about 6 miles north. No hunting is allowed there." Jason nodded slowly. "That could work. But how do we get them to follow us?" Mira glanced at the shed. "They already trust us," she said softly. "We just have to show them the way." Jason took a deep breath and unlatched the shed door. Mira stood beside him, holding a small bag of food, dried berries and nuts. Slowly, they pulled the door open. Inside, the bears stirred. The larger mother bear lifted her head, sniffing the air. The injured cub whimpered softly, stretching its bandaged paw. Mira crouched low, her voice calm. "It's okay. We need to move now." The bears blinked at her, their dark eyes full of understanding. Jason stepped back, pointing toward the forest. "This way." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the larger mother bear stood up. She turned to her cubs and made a soft, deep, chuffing sound. The cubs responded immediately, pressing against her side. Then the second mother bear stood as well. She gently nudged her injured cub forward. They were ready. Mira's breath caught in her throat. "They understand," she whispered. Jason nodded. "Let's move." Mira and Jason walked ahead, moving slowly through the snowy forest. Behind them, the bears followed. It was an unbelievable sight. 2 mother bears, 3 cubs, walking calmly behind 2 humans. Mira glanced back every few steps. The injured cub limped, but the mother stayed close, guiding it. The larger mother bear kept her head high, scanning the trees. She was on guard. She knew they were still being hunted. Jason whispered to Mira, "We need to move faster." Mira nodded. "But we can't rush them. They had to be careful." Halfway to the reserve, Jason suddenly stopped. Mira nearly bumped into him. "What?" Jason grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a tree. Mira's eyes widened as she saw what he saw. Flashlights moving through the trees, and then footsteps. The hunters were back, and they were close. Jason whispered, "They're searching for tracks." Mira's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Jason scanned the area quickly. "We need to get the bears across the river. If we do, the hunters won't follow." Mira bit her lip. "The river's not frozen yet." Jason nodded. "Which means they won't expect us to cross it." Mira turned to the bears. They were waiting, their eyes locked on her. She pointed toward the river. "Come on." The larger mother bear looked at her. Then, to Mira's shock, the bear turned to the others and made a deep grunting sound. The bears started moving again. Mira's hands trembled. "Jason, she's leading them now." Jason's eyes were wide. "They're following her orders." They didn't have time to be amazed. The hunters were getting closer. They had to move. They reached the river's edge. The water was cold and rushing fast, but a large fallen tree stretched partway across it. Mira tested the log carefully. "We can use this." Jason hesitated. "What about the bears?" Mira turned to the lead mother bear. "Can you do this?" The bear stepped forward. She sniffed the air, then tested the log with one massive paw. Then, slowly, she stepped onto it. Mira held her breath as the bear crossed the river. When she reached the other side, she turned back and made a soft chuffing sound. The second mother bear followed, guiding her cubs. Mira and Jason crossed last, their boots slipping slightly on the wet bark. When they reached the other side, Mira let out a shaky breath. "They did it," she whispered. Jason smiled. "And the hunters won't follow now." The sound of engines roared in the distance. Jason looked toward the forest. "The rangers are coming." Mira looked at the bears. They were safe. For the first time since this all started, they were truly safe. The larger mother bear turned to Mira. For a long moment. They simply looked at each other. Then the bear did something incredible. She stepped forward and bowed her head. Mira's throat tightened. Jason whispered, "She's thanking you." Mira blinked back tears. "I think she always knew we would help." The mother bear made one last chuffing sound. Then she turned and led her family deep into the wildlife reserve, out of danger, out of reach, free. Minutes later, the rangers arrived. Jason waved them down. "The hunters are still in the woods." The ranger nodded, already pulling out his radio. "We'll handle them." Mira barely heard them. She was still looking at the spot where the bears had disappeared. Jason placed a hand on her back. "We did it." Mira smiled softly. "No, they did it." Jason chuckled. "Yeah, maybe we were the ones following them." Mira laughed. The sun was rising now, casting a golden glow over the trees, and somewhere deep in the reserve, the bears were starting their new life. A life they had fought for, a life they had chosen. Mira and Jason stood by the river, watching the last glimpse of the bears disappear into the dense forest. The morning sun bathed everything in golden light, casting long shadows over the snowy ground. They had done it. The bears were safe. Jason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I still can't believe it." Mira smiled softly. "Neither can I. Just a few hours ago they had been trapped, hunters on their trail, a storm against them. Now the bears were free. But deep in Mira's heart, she felt something strange. This wasn't over, not yet. The rangers were handling the hunters now. Jason was speaking with them, answering questions. But Mira couldn't stop thinking about the bears. Where had they gone? Would they really be safe? Something pulled at her, an instinct she couldn't explain. Then, she saw it. Near the edge of the river, scratched into the frozen ground, was a marking. Mira crouched down, her breath hitching. 5 straight lines, a circle beside them. Her heart pounded. She had seen these markings before. Back at the shed, Mira traced the lines with her fingers. "Jason!" Jason turned from the rangers, frowning. "What is it?" Mira pointed to the markings. "They left a message." Jason crouched beside her, his expression darkening. Are you sure this wasn't just from the wind or the water? Mira shook her head. No, this was made on purpose. Jason exhaled. What does it mean? Mira looked at the lines again. I think it's a map. Jason frowned. A map to what? Mira's stomach twisted. I don't know, but I think they want us to find them. Mira knew it sounded crazy, but something deep inside her knew this was important. The bears had trusted them, and now they were leading them somewhere. Jason hesitated. Mira, we just barely got them to safety. Maybe we should let them be. Mira looked up at him. Jason, they didn't have to leave this behind. Jason rubbed his face. You really think they're trying to tell us something? Mira nodded. Yes. Jason sighed, looking at the sky, then back at her. All right, he said. Let's go. They packed light, only water, a flashlight, and a first aid kit. Noah stayed with the rangers for safety. Jason kept his rifle strapped to his back just in case. Then they followed the markings into the woods. The snow crunched beneath their boots. The air was crisp, the wind whispering through the trees. Mira kept her eyes on the ground, looking for more signs, and then she saw another, a claw mark on a tree, deep but deliberate. We're going the right way, she whispered. Jason shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. But he kept walking. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Then suddenly, Mira stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Just ahead, nestled between two large boulders, was a cave. Jason stiffened. That must be their den. Mira took a step forward, then another. Her heart pounded. Were they inside? Would they recognize her? Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. Be careful. Mira nodded. She took a deep breath. Then she called out softly, It's me. For a moment there was silence. Then a shadow moved inside the cave. Mira's breath hitched. The larger mother bear stepped into the light. Mira's chest tightened. She wasn't afraid. The bear wasn't growling. She wasn't charging. She was watching. Then behind her, the other mother bear appeared and their cubs. Mira swallowed hard. They hadn't run away. They had been waiting. Jason whispered, Why did they bring us here? Mira shook her head. Then she saw it. Inside the cave on the walls were more markings. Her heart pounded. She stepped closer, Jason right behind her. The bears didn't move. They let her see. Mira ran her fingers over the rough stone. The same 5 lines, the same circle, and beside it, something new, a small rectangle. Jason's eyes widened. That looks like... Mira's breath caught. A cabin. Jason whispered, Mira, that's our home. The days passed. The snow melted. Spring came to the forest. And yet Mira couldn't stop thinking about the bears. She often found herself staring out the cabin window, wondering if they were safe, wondering if they still remembered, wondering if she would ever see them again. A few weeks after their return, the rangers sent a team to investigate the den. They followed Mira and Jason's directions and found the cave deep in the forest. What they discovered shocked them. The markings were still there, the 5 lines, the circle, the cabin, and more. New symbols had been added. One of the rangers, a wildlife expert named Officer Green, studied the markings carefully. He turned to Mira. These aren't just random scratches. Mira nodded. I know. Green ran his fingers over the stone. This is communication. Jason crossed his arms. So you believe us now? Green exhaled. I don't know what to believe. He turned to Mira. But one thing is clear. These bears, they're different. Mira's heart pounded. The world was about to understand what she already knew. The rangers set up cameras near the den. They wanted to track the bears, to see if they would return, to see if they would leave more messages. Weeks passed. Then, one morning it happened. The lead mother bear returned. The cameras captured her walking toward the cave. She sniffed the air, then pressed her paw to the markings. Then, incredibly, she added another symbol, a small X beside the cabin, Mira's. Breath caught in her throat when she saw the footage. Jason stared at the screen, stunned. She's marking our location. Officer Green shook his head in disbelief. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. Mira swallowed hard. She's letting us know she's still watching. Jason nodded. And she knows we're watching. Too? It didn't take long for the story to spread. A bear family showing signs of intelligent communication. It was unheard of. Scientists, journalists, wildlife experts, everyone wanted to know more. The rangers kept the den's location a secret to protect the bears. But word got out. The world was watching now. Mira knew this was good. With attention came protection. With protection came safety. The bears had fought for their lives. Now, people were fighting for them. One morning, Mira sat outside sipping coffee on the porch. Jason was inside playing with Noah. The world had quieted again. For the first time in weeks, life felt normal. Then, a movement in the trees. Mira's breath caught a shadow, large, powerful. She knew that shape. She slowly set down her cup, her heart pounding. The lead mother bear stepped into the clearing. Mira stood up, frozen in place. The bear didn't move closer. She simply watched. Her cubs were behind her, strong and healthy. Mira felt tears in her eyes. She had wondered if she would ever see them again. Now she had her answer. The bear lifted her massive paw and pressed it into the snow. Mira covered her mouth with her hands, emotion flooding through her. Then, just as silently as she had come, the bear turned and disappeared into the forest. Mira whispered, "Goodbye, my friend." Mira never saw the bears again, but she felt their presence. She knew they were still there. She knew they remembered. Years later, stories of the intelligent bears still spread. Scientists debated. Some believed, some didn't. But Mira knew the truth. Some connections, no matter how unlikely, never fade. They grow, they last. And sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones we never expected. Mira stood at the edge of the forest one last time. She took a deep breath. Snowflakes drifted around her. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind, the trees, and then a deep, soft, chuffing sound. Mira smiled. She didn't need to see them. She knew they were there, and that was enough. 2 weeks passed. The bears hadn't returned. Mira sat by the cabin window, watching the snow fall. She wondered if she would ever see them again. Then, a shadow moved at the tree line. Mira's breath caught. She stood up slowly. A familiar figure stepped into view. The lead mother bear. Mira's chest tightened. She wasn't alone. Her cubs were beside her, stronger, healthier. And then, the bear did something incredible. She pressed her paw to the snow. Then, she looked at Mira and turned back into the forest. Mira felt tears in her eyes. She wasn't just an animal anymore. She was a friend. Jason stepped beside her. "Do you think we'll see them again?" Mira smiled softly. "I think we already know the answer, because some bonds, no matter how unlikely, never fade. They grow, and sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones we never expected." Mira and Jason stood at the entrance of the cave, staring at the markings on the walls, the 5 straight lines, the circle, and now, their cabin. Mira's breath caught in her throat. They hadn't just found the bears. The bears had led them here. Jason exhaled. "Mira, this changes everything." Mira swallowed hard. "They know us." Jason nodded. "And they remember." A deep chuffing sound came from the lead mother bear. Not a growl, not a warning. It was acknowledgement, a connection beyond words. Mira and Jason weren't just helping the bears anymore. They were part of their story now. Mira ran her fingers over the stone carvings. The symbols were too deliberate to be random. She turned to Jason. "These mean something." Jason studied them, frowning. "Okay, so we know the 5 lines represent them. And the cabin," he pointed. "That's obviously us." Mira nodded. "But what's this?" She pointed to a new marking. It was different, a curved shape, almost. Like... Jason's eyes widened. "That's the river." Mira gasped. "Jason, they're showing us their territory." Jason stared at the markings. "This is a map." Mira's hands trembled. "Not just a map?" Jason met her gaze. "This is a message." The lead mother bear stepped forward. Mira and Jason instinctively froze, but she didn't attack. Instead, she looked at the wall. Then, to their complete shock, she pressed her massive paw against the markings. Jason whispered, "She's showing us." Mira's chest tightened. The bear turned back to them and made another deep chuffing sound, a soft rumbling noise. Not fear, not aggression, something else. Mira's eyes stung. Jason swallowed hard. She trusts us. Mira exhaled shakily. She's telling us where they live, where they feel safe. Jason ran a hand through his hair. This isn't normal animal behavior, Mira. Mira nodded. No, this is something else. The bears weren't just surviving. They were communicating. Jason turned toward the trees, his body tensing. Something wasn't right. A distant engine rumbled through the forest. Mira stiffened. The hunters. Jason grabbed her arm. We need to go now. Mira looked back at the bears. They're not safe here. Jason cursed under his breath. Mira, we can't move a whole family of bears. Mira's hands clenched into fists. We have to do something. Another sound, this time closer. The crunch of footsteps in the snow. Mira's stomach twisted. They found us. Jason pulled her behind a boulder. Stay low. Through the trees, Mira saw a figure moving. One of the hunters, searching, hunting, looking for the bears. Mira's heart pounded. Then, a snap. A branch cracked under Jason's boot. The hunter turned. Mira's blood ran cold. Their eyes met. The hunter's face darkened. Jason whispered, "Run." Mira grabbed Jason's hand, pulling him toward the cave entrance. The bears were still inside, but now they were alert. The lead mother bear rose onto her hind legs. Jason's breath hitched. She knows. The injured cub whimpered, pressing against its mother's side. Mira turned back. The hunter was lifting his rifle. She had seconds to react. Then, a roar. Not from Jason, not from the hunter, from the bear. A deep, thunderous warning. The hunter hesitated. The second mother bear stepped forward, baring her teeth. The hunter took a step back. Then another. Then, he ran. Jason exhaled sharply. That was close. Mira placed a hand on her chest, feeling her. Racing heartbeat. She turned back to the lead mother bear. The bear was still watching them. Mira swallowed hard. Jason, I think they knew we were in danger. Jason nodded slowly. And they protected us. The weight of that realization hit them both. They had saved the bears. Now the bears had saved them. Mira whispered, "What do we do now?" Jason looked at the carvings again, then at the bears, then finally back at Mira. "We tell someone," he said. Mira's throat tightened. "No one's going to believe this." Jason nodded. "Then we'll show them." Mira looked at the lead mother bear one last time, and incredibly, the bear nodded back. Mira and Jason made their way back to the ranger station. When they arrived, they told the rangers everything. The bears, the den, the map. At first, the rangers were skeptical. Then Mira showed them the photos she had taken of the cave markings. Silence filled the room. One of the rangers leaned in, studying the images. "Are you saying these bears are drawing maps?" Mira took a deep breath. "I'm saying these bears are smarter than we think." Jason crossed his arms. "And they deserve protection." The lead ranger nodded slowly. "We'll send a team to investigate." Mira exhaled. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start, a step toward understanding. Mira's hands trembled. She turned back to the bears. "You know who we are," she whispered. The larger mother bear blinked slowly. Jason exhaled. "This isn't just survival." Mira nodded. "It's memory. These bears weren't just reacting to instinct. They had chosen to find them again. They had led them here." Mira's voice cracked. "They remember us." Jason let out a shaky breath. "Mira, this changes everything." The lead bear made a soft chuffing sound. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't fear. It was acknowledgement. Mira's eyes filled with tears. She had spent her whole life studying animals, learning their behaviors. But this was something new. This wasn't just survival. It was trust. It was understanding. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more. Mira took a slow step back. She nodded at the bears, and incredibly, the larger mother bear nodded back. Jason whispered, "Mira, what do we do now?" Mira's lips parted. For the first time, she had no idea what came next. But she knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning.